Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which ended yesterday on the Feast of the Assumption, for all my Catholic friends out there. Before going any further, though, make sure that you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. Also, make sure that you have that bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So, it was an interesting weekend for the films coming out, because some films overperformed based on estimates, and one film in particular really underperformed in a very drastic way. And we'll talk about all of that today. Let's first off talk about the film that seemed to overperform, and that is the 20th Century Fox holdover from the 20th Century Fox Disney deal, and that is the Ryan Reynolds-led film Free Guy, which is one of the very few, I guess you could call, original concepts that has been released over the past several weeks. There's been a lot of reboots, there's been a lot of remakes, there's been a lot of continuations of stories and all this other stuff going on, but there really haven't been a whole lot of original properties and original ideas. And this is a movie that also Disney did not really have a lot of faith in, and that is made very clear when they decided, hey, we're just going to have this be kind of like a test run for our for the theaters, and be like, hey, we're not going to put this on Disney Plus, we're not going to have premiere access for this, we're not going to try and balloon the numbers by saying, oh, well, it actually made $60 million on the Premier Access side. No, instead they were like, good luck, Free Guy, with your massive budget, and we have very low expectations for you. And it ended up actually performing a lot better than people had expected. However, that being said, the film still is not in the best position possible, because the film had a huge budget, as I mentioned, and it's going to be very hard for that film to make its budget back, as has been the case for any major big budget film coming out from any of the studios. So as you can see, Free Guy came in at number one at $28.4 million domestically, actually getting released at over 4,000 screens. So even though Disney really didn't show a whole lot of confidence in the movie, they very clearly were using it as a test run by putting it out in the most screens that they possibly could, or at least getting very close to that fact. And then also the fact that they did indeed have promotions for it. They did allow the running of ads for it and everything like that. And hey, I guess Ryan Reynolds might be one of the few people in a comedy that might be able to still bring some people out to a theater. The other film that came out this weekend that came in the number 2 slot is Don't Breathe 2. I saw the first Don't Breathe, and it was actually a pretty interesting thriller until the end, when things got really weird and bizarre in this really weird twist fashion. And I don't really know if I want to see a sequel going further into the events of that. It's again a very bizarre film. It's a very fun thriller, much more than you would think, right? The whole concept is essentially that these kids decide to break into this person's home because they know that he is blind, and they don't realize that he has hyper hearing, as it were, and also he happens to be murderous as well, because guess what? You're breaking into a man's home, and so you have all this happening, and then there's this twist. And again, I want to go into it, even though the first film came out within the last 5 years. It's still one where I think it's better to go in not knowing anything about it, but it is a pretty weird twist at that. So Don't Breathe 2, though, is, again, making a little bit of money here. 3,000 screens, $10.6 million at the number 2 slot. Jungle Cruise from Disney dropping to number 3 here. Another 43% drop for that movie, now losing 410 screens with another $9 million. So again, Jungle Cruise still very much in the flop territory there, just not making enough money worldwide, especially. A new film also, Respect, about Aretha Franklin here, starring Jennifer Hudson, which again, I thought, based on the trailer, was like, okay, this is actually very much fitting. I think Jennifer Hudson's a very talented singer. If anyone can play Aretha Franklin, it's probably her. But from what I've heard about it, is definitely very much an indie feel, and it probably doesn't have enough money or attention put onto supporting characters and the general story for it to really be able, I think, to rise above anything else. So again, this is yet another example that even indie films, even lower budget films, aren't necessarily safe from potentially losing money. And then the other big story of this weekend, as I said, there's one film that very drastically underperformed, and that is The Suicide Squad. And again, I know there's a lot of fan people out there, fanboys and fangirls out there that are still, die hard defending this movie, but the numbers just really don't back you up on this as far as people, actually going out to the theater to enjoy it. And yeah, you can try and argue the HBO Max numbers, but until you can actually show me numbers of people signing up for HBO Max specifically for this movie, or holding on to their subscription just for this movie, that number means very little to this movie specifically. Warner Brothers and how much money they're making in general from HBO Max It's a very different discussion. But as far as the profitability of this specific film, the numbers really just aren't backing that up at this point. So this film had a massive 71% drop from week 1 to week 2. And it's pretty bad when you also look to the fact that 71% drop, making only 7.5 million, dropping it to the number 5 slot, really showing just how little money it made in its opening weekend. And I think that that is incredibly important for us to point out. And also incredibly important for us to realize that this film, now at this point, it's going to be nowhere near getting $100 million domestically, and it's not making money really internationally either. So this is a film that is, as I can say now, because I can now make projections based on the week 2 numbers, is guaranteed to lose at least around $130 million for Warner Brothers. And again, they might be fine with that because HBO Max is still probably making enough money for them in general to be able to pay off some of these massive flops that they've had this year, especially from Warner Brothers, especially from the DCEU. But hey, it is still not a good sign for that movie going forward. So as we can see from Free Guy, so it made $28 million, $20.4 million domestically. It did make around $51 million internationally. The numbers just has not updated that number as of yet. Again, a lot of the other sites are reporting on this. So Deadline talking here about how it's made $51 million so far. And again, everyone's trying to say, oh yeah, it's massively overperforming. And again, maybe based on projections it overperformed, but you'll see in a minute about the production budget that it's still nowhere near being to the point of it being successful, at least at this point. We'll see what the week 1 and week 2 drop-off is next week, but again, it's going to be very hard for any film to be able to make their money back with a massive budget. Don't Breathe 2, once again, another lower budget horror film. More of a thriller film in this way, making $14 million worldwide, which for a movie like this is, a pretty good showing. But even here, right, we're seeing that the lower budget films still have to make, a fair amount throughout the, basically they have to have some pretty good legs throughout the entirety of their run in order to get to that break-even point, or at least get close enough to the break-even point to be able to make it up through DVD, Blu-ray, 4K sales, which probably haven't been as impacted as the actual theatrical numbers have been. Disney Jungle Cruise is now at $154 million worldwide. So again, that domestic number, you're seeing it's creeping up closer to that $100 million, and it's still definitely possible for the film to reach that, but I think it might be slowing down enough for it to not get there, but obviously we know Disney will do anything and everything for metrics and for optics, and so they very well could just force this film to be in theaters long enough to just, get as much money as they can to try and get that number to where it is, or they'll at least go back to their Disney Plus numbers and say, well, it's already gotten $100 million domestically because we count the Disney Plus numbers, which we really cannot confirm or verify or explain all that much. But $154 million on a $200+ million budget film, not a very good showing because, again, they don't get 100% of this number. So they still have a long ways to go. This is pretty much, again, guaranteed flop at this point. RESPCT Respect, again, $8.8 million domestically, independent film. Not really going to be making a whole lot worldwide, and even though it was a lower budget movie, it still has to do a little bit better than this to make its money back. And The Suicide Squad at $117.8 million, again, for a very high budget. This film, again, now guaranteed to be a flop. So let's go ahead and look at some of those numbers. As I mentioned, Free Guy, $51 million internationally in its opening weekend. But let's start off here with The Suicide Squad because this was the one film I was able to update. So based on these numbers at $117.8 million worldwide, that means that the film is likely going to make anywhere between $168 million and $235 million by the end of its run. So well below $300 million. And that means very, very much well below any type of break-even number, because this movie really would have to make close to $450 million for it to even get close to breaking even. It's not going to get even there. It's going to miss that by a good, $200 million or so. So again, it's really not in a position to be in a successful state at this point. And the really big reason for that is because of that $185 million production budget, with marketing costs based on industry standards, $277.5 million total, meaning this film is going to lose somewhere between $136 million and $176 million. So this is yet another massive flop for Warner Brothers. Obviously, I would still say that it's not going to be as big of a flop as a movie like, for instance, a movie like Wonder Woman 1984, but that film also cost a lot more than this movie did. So they're pretty much on par as far as the financial losses are concerned. So yeah, not a very good showing in the second weekend for Suicide Squad. And yet another box office flop. As I mentioned before about Respect, even though it's a lower budget film, it still costs $55 million to make, meaning that this movie at this point is at negative $77 million. So, theoretically, if it starts to make money internationally, or It has some really impressive legs, and again, which is not going to be very likely, seeing that the starting point is $8.8 million, meaning that this film would have to basically have very, very small drops based on how long this is probably going to be in theaters, seeing that it is an independent film. So this film probably is yet another independent film flop as such. You do have, of course, here the $14 million that was made by Don't Breathe. But even that movie, right? Lower budget film, $25 million budget, $37.5 million total cost. Still at negative 29. So this is a movie where theoretically, I think that out of all the films that have come out this weekend, this has the best chance to get to the break-even point. It really depends on that week 2 number. And also if it starts to make any money anywhere else and hold numbers anywhere else as well. And again, obviously, if it gets close enough at the very least to that break-even number, it could still make that up in the long run in Blu-ray, 4K sales, etc. So again, I haven't heard a whole lot about people's reactions to this movie, but I know that there were a lot of people who were fans of that first one. And again, up until the twist, I was pretty much on board with it. But again, this is probably the best position to make some money back as far as movies that came out this weekend. And as you can see from the film coming out with Free Guy, Ryan Reynolds' Free Guy, $51 million worldwide. Again, it's better than what they expected. It's still at negative $141 million. So it still has a long way to go in order for it to make its money back. And that's because the budget of the film was around $115 million, $172.5 million with marketing. And remember, with these marketing costs, and this goes for all the films that I've mentioned over the last several weeks, all of these films I've seen in some capacity some type of delay, meaning that those marketing costs are probably a lot higher than the industry standard because they've had to prolong marketing campaigns. They've had to start over marketing campaigns as well. And all of these things are obviously things that we don't have full access to because of that very reason. But based even on more conservative estimates, this movie still, though it's overperforming, is not anything necessarily to be happy about as far as the box office is concerned. The box office is still very much in a very dangerous state. It is still very much in a state where it is hemorrhaging money. It's not making anything. But if this is showing us anything, it's, I think, showing us that if you put out films with people that general audiences like Ryan Reynolds, and especially if they're interesting original properties that seem to be a lot of fun, that's what are going to bring people out to the theater. Again, $51 million worldwide. Even though Suicide Squad made $72.2 million worldwide, most of that came from the foreign marketplace. When you look to the domestic weekends, Free Guy and the Suicide Squad are kind of on par. And if you actually think about the fan bases, and if you actually think about how hardcore the DCEU fan base is and people who are going out defending the Suicide Squad, it's kind of one of those weird things where it's like, okay, a brand new property and a brand new film in Free Guy was able to basically be on par with a film like the Suicide Squad. And some might argue, well, it's rated R, so you got to take that into account. It's like, okay, but that can only really take you so far. I think there is a lot more here to be said that this movie is bringing people in because it is an original concept and it is featuring someone who in general people like. I mean, obviously this is a PG-13 film, but I still think that those other factors are a lot more at play here. And I think studios would learn a lot, especially since this is a holdover from 20th Century Fox. So this is not even an original Disney property. So it's amazing to me that the film overperforming for Disney, even though it's still not at the point of profitability, the film that's overperforming and exceeding expectations is a film that they had really nothing to do with. And I think that speaks volumes as far as the current state of things at the box office with Disney and Warner Brothers, etc. But anyway, what are your thoughts about this? Do you think Free Guy is going to beat the odds and somehow make its money back? I just, based on the numbers, I'm just not seeing that at this point in time. Let me know your thoughts. Also, have you seen films like Don't Breathe or Respect? What are your thoughts about those films? Let me know as well in the comment section below, as well as my voice. It's still very much on the point of recovery. But you guys are awesome. Thank you again for being here. Make sure that you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching on Odyssey. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my August Locals, Patreon, and Subscribe Star members. Starting off with my Locals crew, Cat's App, The Real It, D Sharp, Bifford a Hobbit, Robert Barnes, and Goblin Squatch. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on Locals. And now on to my Patreon members, Andrew Hoyle, Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Dion, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Lance, Laura, the Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mondo Spieler, Mr. Peabody, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Allen, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina Bojan, and Tina B, the Empress of the Universe. Thank you very much for supporting me over on Patreon. And lastly, to my Subscribe Star peeps, Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B, Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. And a shout out to one new member, Hannibal Grimm. Thank you all very much for supporting me on Subscribestar, and to everyone for supporting me on these platforms. Also, a shout out to all of my YouTube members. You get shouted out at the end of every single live stream. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and every video, please check out my locals Patreon Subscribestar. And you can go ahead and find those links in the top link of this description. You can find it's called the Willow link, and it'll have a list to literally all of the social media platforms and all of the different ways that you can support the channel. If you join at the $1 level, you can actually get your name shouted out at the end of every single video and live stream. $5 level gives you that, plus you get access to exclusive giveaways of 4K titles. Right now, I've got tons of 4K steelbooks to give away this month, including for Top Gun. I also have A Quiet Place Part 2. I have Snatch on 4K, the John Wick trilogy on 4K, and also I have a Sicario 4K disc as well, and a bunch of others that are going to be coming in this month too. So if you want to have access to any of those types of exclusive giveaways, join at the Army of Asgard level. At the $10 level, the Keeper of the Bifrost level, you get all of that, plus you get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes videos, including instant reactions when I go to see movies. I do quick little filmings of myself and talk about the films that I have seen and my instant reactions to that. You also get access to an exclusive podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger once or twice a month, and you get to also ask us any question that you want. We put a Q&A post up, and you get to ask us whatever it is that you want to ask. So again, if that sounds cool to you, Keeper of the Bifrost level. And lastly, there is the Chosen of Valhalla level, where you get all of that stuff, plus in your first month as a Chosen of Valhalla member, you get a free t-shirt, your choice, ship it anywhere in the world, and also you get to once a month be featured on the OMB Reviews channel, and you get to talk with me. We usually chill out for 3 to 4 hours, and I ask everyone what they've been watching, what they want to talk about, what they want to promote, and it's always a really good time. And so if that sounds interesting to you, please consider joining. That is going to be on Subscribestar and on Patreon only, as Locals is just the Keeper of the Bifrost level. But anyway, thank you all very much for your time, for your support, and for listening to this shout-out video. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.